Hi, I'm Caroline Leavitt. I'm the co-founder of A Mighty Blaze, which began the day that the pandemic did, crushing author tours, including mine, shuttering indie bookstores and all bookstores, and just generally messing everything up. So Mighty Blaze was started to promote bookstores, promote reading, promote writers, and this is our third year, so we're going strong. I'm really excited today because we have Jennifer Banash here. She's going to talk about her wonderful book, The Rise and Fall of Ava Arcana. So let me tell you a little bit about her, read you some of the press, and then we'll talk. And also I want to tell you, if you've got any questions at all, just pop them in the chat. Don't be shy. And also, I also popped in a link for bookshop.org, an easy way to buy Jennifer's book, or you can buy it anywhere you like, anywhere where books are sold. Okay, so Jennifer Banash is a former professor of English and creative writing. She's the author of the novel Silent Alarm, which was a finalist for the American Library Association's Best Fiction for Young Adults, White Lines, Simply Irresistible, In Too Deep, and The Elite. She's the former co-founder and editor of Impetus Press, a small independent publishing house that championed works of literary fiction with a pop edge. I love that. She's a native New Yorker. This is my favorite part of your bio, Jennifer. Her first apartment was an illegal sublet located next door to the Hells Angels' former headquarters on the Lower East Side, yay, New York. Okay, so let's read some of the press for her book. Banash's novel is of the read in one sitting type, each new page adding endless suspense and predictable twists, bookless. Okay. Kate Christensen, one of my favorite authors, says this dark, sexy novel combines the rocker chick moxie of Daisy Jones and the Six with the psychological thriller plot twist of Social Creature. Banash's clear, lush prose makes The Rise and Fall of Ava Arcana a gripping read. It is a gripping read, and it's a wonderful book. It's about a Rolling Stones journalist, Kayla McRae, who's assigned to cover a story on pop icon Lexi Mayhem. Great last name, right? Lexi Mayhem. Perfect punk name. But instead, Kayla stumbles across a new angle to the expose. Years ago, another rising singer from Lexi's past mysteriously leaped to her death. The rising star was Ava, who met Lexi and was taken under her wings. But as the two friends climb to stardom, there's room for only one at the top. What really happened to Ava and why? Okay, this is an incredible novel that explores friendship, fame, mystery, the music business, all of this. I want to first talk. So first of all, welcome, Jennifer. I'm so happy to see you. I saw Jennifer at PNT Knitwear, and she was fabulous.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm thrilled to have you. So let's talk about the inception story. Rumor has it that this was based on another rumor that Lady Gaga herself threw someone off a roof. Is that true? And if it isn't, it should be.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's true, but it is true that I did. The origin story of the novel started right there. There is an urban legend about Lady Gaga that she had a best friend in the music industry with her when she was coming up on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And they were, they did everything together and whatever. But they both got signed to major labels. And Gaga, of course, ended up going off to LA to make her first album.
Right.
And the other woman, whose name was Lena, fell off a rooftop, and the official story was that she committed suicide. And then a month later, I think it was a month later, Gaga's album came out. Of course, was like a huge smash, and Lena was forgotten pretty much, except in the deep sort of subreddits of the internet where people were
right
these kinds of stories, right? So I just started to really think about what would have happened if there was any merit whatsoever to this story, right? Like, where could I go with these two characters? So I think they were the starting point. But then, of course, once Lexi and Ava I started writing them, they became their own people, really. So I don't think Gaga would read my book and really see much of herself in it. Or maybe she would. I don't know,
Did you send the book? Did you send the book to her?
No.
Oh, you should be brave. Be brave. Just like, you know,
it's my publicist. Like, she would be so happy if Gaga like sued me or something. She was like, oh my God, we'd throw a party.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, we have to do it.
I thought the whole thing was so incredibly interesting about, when you come up in any business, publishing or the music business or whatever, and you're coming up with a friend and you're both cheering each other on, there's a dynamic that happens. It's almost like a seesaw. And sometimes it's really hard not to feel, a yearning to have what your friend has, or not to feel like, well, I'm up here and somebody else is down there. Like, what do I do to even it out? Which brings to me the question of, what do you think about the whole?
It's funny you bring that up, though, because it's really why I'm friends with so few writers. I mean, I'm friends with a lot of writers on Facebook, but I have very few close female friends who are also writers, because I just sort of found over the years that it can be really difficult to be in those kinds of friendships when there's like the aspect of competition. And the women who are in my life, who I very much treasure, and female friendship's a huge part of what I write. Really, we don't have that aspect at all in our friendships of competition. It's very much like a mutual admiration society.
Well, that's the way it should be, because I have a select group of writer friends who are not like that, and they're same thing, treasure them, can't live without them. But you start to learn that fame is sort of, you might be incredibly famous one year, and then the next year nobody knows who you are, and nobody wants to publish your book. And then the next year maybe you go up a little bit, and then you go down. And the thing is, if you base your life on that, and who you are is how famous you are, you're just going to want to jump off your house, do the same thing as Ava. So that's interesting that you said that. So I want to know, what made you I love the dual narrative. So I wanted to know, what made you decide on having two people telling their stories, and how do you decide on your structure in the first place?
Well, I tried a couple of different things when I first started writing the book. I mean, the first iteration of the novel that I ever tried was doing it like as a podcast. So the whole frame was a podcast.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. And, there was like a male journalist that was kind of like trying to uncover this story. And it had Lexi's POV in it also. And I turned in like the first few chapters to my agent, and my agents were like, this is a mess. So, they didn't really mince words. They were like, this is a mess. We can't see it on TV. And I'm like, okay, because that's their thing, right? And so I went back to the drawing board, and then somebody, a very early reader who had read, a few chapters, gave me like some really good advice, and was just like, listen, if this is a mystery, we're sort of like a quasi mystery.
Right.
You have Lexi's POV, there's no tension because we know too much about her.
Right.
She has to be an enigma. So I kind of went back to the drawing board, and I decided that it was going to be, the dual structure between Ava, and then I ditched the male reporter and brought Kayla in, because I was like, this is a story about women. Why am I having a male reporter? Because it just seems stupid. And so I was like, fuck it, I'll bring another woman in. And so I did. And then I started writing the dual narratives, and the early readers who looked at it were like, okay, now we're on track. Like, now we're cooking with gas. So yeah.
I wanted to ask you, I loved when you said you gave it to your agent or your editor, and they said, oh, this is a mess, because I think it's important for every writer out there and every reader out there to know that for most of us writers, our early drafts are a mess. And we all get I got like 20 pages of notes from my editor about this wasn't working. And you're always sort of in shell shock first, and then you get to work and you realize, oh yeah, they're right.
I think isn't it Annie Lamott who has that whole big thing about shitty first drafts? Like, you have to write these shitty first drafts, right? And you do, you really do. And I mean, I wrote whole books when I was younger that never got published, just to sort of teach myself how to write novels. And thank God they never got published, because they were terrible. But that's fine. It's okay to write.
It's okay.
It's okay.
Yeah, it is. It's okay to write. It's okay to write a shitty 18th draft. Also, and
Totally.
I think you just sort of learn as you go along, like what can work and what can't, and you have to, and you end up sort of loving when you get comments. It sort of toughens your skin, and of course, you don't want anything like good read comments
No,
where people
but I don't
tear
read
you
my,
apart,
I
but
don't, I don't read
constructive.
my reviews at all. I don't read my reviews at
Really,
all.
that was going to be my
Nope.
next question.
Nope. Because I had a really great editor years ago. She was actually at my reading, Stacey Barney, and when I was at Putnam, and I had read my reviews when I think White Lines came out, and I was just doing that thing that we all do, which is like
Right.
completely obsessing over the terrible ones and ignoring the great ones. And
Right.
White Lines got like a great review from Booklist. It got a great review from Pub Weekly. And I'm stressing about some like terrible comment that's 2 lines on Amazon. So I remember Stacey was like, "Listen to me, stop reading them. Just don't read them. The
Don't
best
read
thing
them.
you
I
can do
know.
is start writing another book." So ever
Yes.
since then, that's what I do. I don't look at my reviews at all. I just start writing another book. And it's like, Ava's great, but like it kind of doesn't exist to me now because it's out in the
Right.
world. And it's almost like it has nothing to do with me. It's just doing its own thing. And it's doing really, really well, which I'm like so grateful for. But
It's amazing. It's doing amazingly, which is wonderful. Yeah, I'm glad you said that. That's really good advice. Go
I'm
on
not
and write another
particularly
book.
thin-skinned. I'm not particularly thin-skinned. I was a ghostwriter for many years, and so I'm really used to taking feedback and whatnot. But I just don't feel like reviews, unless they are, it's like somebody DMing me and being like, "Oh, I love this book." Like I love to hear from readers, but like,
Right.
yeah, that's different. You know what I mean? Like
It's a
that's
very different thing.
Yeah.
Unless the readers are pointing out typos or things that they think are incorrect. I mean, I'm
I
always
only
very
had someone
polite.
do that once, and I was like, "Come on, like, what are you doing? Like, really? You have nothing better to do?"
I know. So I heard that you started writing after lockdown, but before we came on here, you told me that you had stopped writing for a few years. So first, I want to know what made you stop writing, what made you come back to it, and what was it like writing? Writing after lockdown. What was your life like during the pandemic?
Well, I got COVID on March 11th, 2020. My then husband and I and our daughter were basically fleeing Manhattan. We had no idea that we were infected. We had actually been in quarantine, getting ready to go to. We had a house in Maine at the time, and so we were going to go there. My ex-husband was a reporter, and so he was getting a lot of information early that a lot of people weren't privy to. And he came home one day from work and said, "This is going to be bad. We have to get out." And so we left. It was my daughter's birthday the day before we left. We canceled her party, but we let her go to school that day, because it was her last day at school. We let her go. School was still going. New York shut down later than a lot of places, which seems crazy looking back at it
seems
now.
crazy, yeah.
And then I remember taking her to school that morning, and there were protesters in front of the school holding signs that said, "Close the schools or we will die."
Oh my God.
It was unbelievable, and I'm dropping my 7-year-old off, who just 7 that day. Next day, we're in the car headed to Maine, and we get there too late at night to, do anything. We just go right to the house. My husband wakes up with a fever the next day, and he puts on like an old KN95 mask he found like in the garage and goes to the hospital. They only tested him because we were from New York. And of course, his test came back positive, and then I got sick.
Oh my God.
And then so both of us were sick, and like I'm trying to he was quarantined in the garage, and I was in the house with Story wearing a mask. And of course, there were really no masks back then either.
No, there weren't. You had to makeshift them out of bandanas and stuff.
Masks, and I'm like trying to cook dinner and read bedtime stories while I have like 103 fever, and I was just on my own. Like nobody could help me. And so after that passed, and I started to get better, I had long COVID. And so I didn't really get better, all the way better, until summer. And right before I had left New York, I had been talking to my agents about writing another book. And we were just in very early talks because I hadn't written for a while and I wasn't sure I wanted to write more. And after, things sort of settled down, I think in like June of 2020, my agents called me back up and were like, so, hey, are you alive? Like, what's happening? It was very much one of those conversations, Zooms, where we're like, oh, we're all alive. This is great. And they were like, so do you still want to write? And I said, I don't know. I have long COVID.
That's
I don't know.
so interesting.
I don't know if I can. I mean, like, I was at that point where I was like holding an avocado in my hand and like searching for the word. I'm like, I know this thing. I know what this thing is, but I have no idea what to call it. And I was terrified I was really never going to be able to write or edit again. And we started talking and the idea for Ava came up and I said, well, let me just try. Let me try to do a few chapters and we'll see. And, like I did, I stayed up like pretty late that night and I was like in this internet rabbit hole about the whole conspiracy theory. And then I pounded out a few early chapters. And even though the early chapters didn't end up working, that's when I really knew that I was going to do this. Like I was going to write the book. And then so eventually I went back to New York and I started writing like in earnest. And I finished the book in 9 months.
Wow, that's fast.
I think we took 3 months after that, just for cleanup. I gave it to some early readers and I cleaned it up. And just so when it went out for sale, it wasn't like a giant disaster. But really, I mean, Ava's pretty much in the same, it's pretty much the same book that I turned in at the very start when it sold as it is now.
Yeah, I read an interview with you where you said you don't do drafts, you edit as you write. So how does that work? Does that mean like you'll go over and over a paragraph until you feel like, okay, this is good, now I can go on?
I just write, and then generally I go back and I'll fix things. Like I'll write 3 or 4 chapters and then I'll take a day where I'll be like, all right, let me look at all this. And I'll go back and I'll look at it with fresh eyes, and then I'll just sort of like, mess around with it, edit it.
I want to talk about the music business. How do you know what you knew about the music business to get it on the page? And two-part question.
Yeah, okay.
And do you think the music business is worse than the publishing business, especially for women?
Oh God. How do I know about the music business? I don't really. I mean, I know a little bit, but I love music, and so I'm like a huge music file. I don't know. Is that a word? But like, I love music. I'm always like listening to new bands, and it's just pretty much like, like how I access my emotional, like the emotional side of me is really through music, and through somewhat through literature. But anyway, what was the second part? I forgot the second part now.
Oh yeah, do you think the music
business is worse? I absolutely think the music business is worse, especially for women. I think it's worse, absolutely, because even though if you're a woman writer, you do get objectified to some degree, it's absolutely nothing compared to like what an up and coming like pop star would have to deal with. Nobody looks at me and is like, hey, you need to lose 15 pounds or you're going to lose your record deal. I can, it helps that I'm not hideous, but it's not a problem if I am, So yeah, I think it's way worse, and I think women are under tremendous amounts of pressure. You look at somebody like, I was just talking about this last night. Like you look at somebody like Taylor Swift, and there are all these crazy rumors about Taylor Swift that she's really actually gay, and all these women, all these men she dates are just beards, right? And you look at her, and this is somebody who like makes their living doing confessional songwriting. But if all that is really true, who knows what she's really thinking? I find it fascinating.
That's right. Oh, I know, it's terrible. It's just completely. It's just really. I was telling somebody the other day that my first entry into this was when a friend whose husband was a music producer was just sort of bragging about a new person that he had signed. And he said, well, the first thing we're going to do is take her to the hairdresser, then take her shopping. And I said, oh my God, really? She's been turned into a commodity, this poor girl.
Well, you you see some of that in publishing. I mean, publishing is a terrible business, just in a different way. I mean, you see some of that. Like, I remember like when, like Marisha Pessel came onto this literary scene.
Right.
All anyone would talk about was how beautiful her author photo was. And I was just like, is anyone going to talk about the fact this woman's a goddamn genius? Like, I mean, some of her work, like Night Film blew me away as a book, just blew me away. And like when I read that book, I think even back then I was already sort of thinking about, obviously I didn't have the idea for Ava then, but I was thinking about, writing books that were cinematic in that way. I still don't know why that book's not a movie. It should be a movie.
Yeah. I also want to talk about your novel has such a sense of place. And you already said that you had lived in LA, then you came to New York. So this again is kind of like a. Oh, you grew up in New York.
I grew up here. So
and then you went to LA. Okay.
Yeah, I grew up in New York. I've lived all over the place. I grew up in New York, and then when I was around 17 or 18, I moved to Arizona. And so then I lived in
Arizona. Wow.
Yeah, I went to ASU. And so I went to Tempe, Arizona. I lived there and did my degree. And then I got into the University of Iowa for grad school. And then I went there and did my PhD. And then after that, I got a teaching job in LA. So then I moved to LA and I lived there for 10 years. Then I moved to Maine. And then I moved back to
Wow. How are you different in each place? I mean, I always feel like where you live sort of brands you.
I don't think I am. I'm like everybody else who grew up here. I'm just so imprinted as a New Yorker that like I would, be in LA and people would, I'd say 2 words in a conversation. They'd be like, "You're from New York, aren't you?"
It's so funny. I was talking with another writer who she lived in New York for a while, then moved to Connecticut. And I was saying, I live in Hoboken now, but whenever I tell people where I'm from, I always say, I'm a New Yorker. And she said, well, you should say I'm a New Yorker living in Hoboken, because I say I'm a New Yorker living in Connecticut. There's something about like when you've lived in New York for a while, it just sort of, it's who you are. It's really hard to not be that.
I like to say I'm a New Yorker by birth and also by temperament. Like it's
that's just, even better. I'm going to steal that. That's even better.
Take it.
Okay, so I want to talk about Ava's immigrant mother, because there's a lot. I want you to talk about mothers and daughters in the book, and then
another about her mom. Cool. I'm excited now.
I always notice that. And the second part of my question is, how did your own motherhood change you? Did it change your writing also?
It did. It did. I was trying to get pregnant when I wrote White Lines and when I was starting to work on Silent Alarm. And I had been trying to get pregnant for a really long time, and it was just sort of like miscarriage after miscarriage. And then I was teaching at the time, and I was teaching at a private school, and we had very, very generous parents of these kids, right? And I was friends with one of my students' mothers, and she had mentioned one day she knew what had gone on with me because I'd been out for a little while, like recovering from the miscarriages. And she called me up and said, listen, she had this amazing house in Malibu, and she was like, I'm going out of town for like 2-3 weeks. This was summertime. She's like, take the house. You can use it as a writing retreat. And it was like
wow.
It was unbelievable. And I went there, and right before I left, I said to my husband, I'm done. Like, we've tried enough, and it's just going to have to be you and me, and we're just going to have to be okay with that. And he was like, no problem. And so I went on this like writing retreat. He came to visit me one time, and I came home 2.5 weeks later and took a pregnancy test, and it lit up like a Christmas tree.
Oh, that's so great. That's so great.
So, I had a really easy pregnancy. I wrote all the way through it. But when Story's my daughter's name, but when Story came, I had just finished up Silent Alarm, I just finished White Lines. And I remember I gave birth to her, and a week later I was at the LA Times Festival of Books signing White Lines. And I remember getting out of the car and I was wearing this really pretty dress. And I was so excited that my old dress fit right after giving birth. And I was like so excited. I get out of the car, and I hear this rip all the way up the back.
Oh,
the whole dress is ripped from like my butt all the way up to my neck. And I'm like, and it's 10 minutes before I'm supposed to be at my booth. I'm like, what am I going to do? I find this old ratty cardigan in my trunk that I was going to give to Goodwill. That's why it was there.
Oh my God.
95 degrees in LA, of course, because it's like April in LA and it's, hot. And so I throw this cardigan over and I'm like, and so like every time I see a picture of myself from that day, I just crack up because
I want to see a picture. I want to see a picture when you have it. I do.
I think the thing is though, and then I wrote Silent Alarm, which is a book about a fictional school shooting that I did, which was really difficult for me to write after I'd had a baby, I mean, I dedicated the book to my daughter. And, I wrote this little afterword that basically said that, like, I really hope that by the time she grew up, school shootings like the one that I had detailed in the book would have been a thing of the past. Sadly, obviously, that's not
happening right now. I know.
I was very burned out after I wrote Silent Alarm. I was exhausted. I just could not focus. I left my teaching job hoping that would help. And I just went freelance for a while. And I was freelancing so much that there was just no space to write. And every other minute I had was, story was teething, story was spitting up, story was sick. The whole rigmarole of things you go through as
motherhood.
Yeah. Somehow years passed and I hadn't, written another book. And again, until 2020, I knew I would always write something else. I didn't know if it would be then, But at that point, story was 7. That made a huge difference. Like,
right.
I don't know how anyone writes when their kid is like 3, 4. I mean, I don't know. I don't even remember the meal.
It's hard. It's hard. I just remember bassinet beside me, 2 hours, Max would sleep, I would write. Then he would wake up, we'd play together for 2 hours, and then he'd go back to sleep, and I'd go back to work. You learn to write on the fly almost. It's a little
totally. Bit like you learn to write as a job, I feel like, in a way. You know what I mean? Like, and I had been a ghostwriter for a long time. My first job as a ghostwriter was writing for the Gossip Girl series. So, I mean, I was on like a 5-week deadline for books, like every 5 weeks, there had to be a book. Because the audience was so voracious, that, you couldn't, there couldn't be any time really in between books. And YA is still very much like that. If you're doing a series, it has to be, my series that I did under my own name, again, it was 3 books in less than 3 years. Like,
wow.
So you can understand by the time I had story, I was tired.
Oh, yeah.
I was tired. She's my only kid. I'm not having any more. And I knew that. So I really wanted to take some time to focus on her.
Okay. We actually have some audience questions, but before I get to them, I want to ask you about ghostwriting, because ghostwriting is something that I tried to do once.
I remember
as a job, and I could not do it. I kept wanting to change it into a Caroline Leavitt book, and after a while, I thought, I can't do this. So tell me how you got into it, how you like it. Is it weird for you? Like, how do you separate so you're not writing a Jennifer Banash book?
Yeah, I don't really do it anymore. I haven't ghostwritten in about a year right now. I'm mostly just editing. But I was a ghostwriter for the better part of 15 years. So it was a huge part of my life. I got into it totally by accident, completely and totally by accident. I was doing my PhD and I was running this really small press called Impetus. And we, as you said, we published serious literary fiction with a pop edge. And we had a writer that we had signed. And his day job was writing this spin-off of Gossip Girl. He was the ghostwriter on it. It was this series called The It Girl. And we thought that was hilarious because he was like this huge guy. He was like 6'2", 220, and he's like the it girl, you know. It was like, but he was so good at it. He was so good at it. And he emailed me one day and he's like, my editor needs a new ghost for Gossip Girl. And I think you'd be really perfect. And I was like, you're funny. Why would I be good at this? And I was like, I've never written for children. I have no desire to write YA. And he was like, you know the Upper East Side, you know, pop culture. I just feel like this is going to work. And so I didn't think anything of it. I just sent in Sarah Chandler, who is now the head of Alloy Entertainment, but when back then, 15 years ago, she was just starting. And I sent her in some sample chapters. She signed me immediately. You could have knocked me over.
Wow.
She was just like, here's the next book. Here's the outline. You got 5 weeks. And I was like, oh shit, now I have to do it.
Now you have to do it.
So I did it, and that was fine, and I worked with them, and then I got a call from an editor at Penguin, and she was like, I heard through the grapevine, and I'm like, what grapevine? Like she was
Yeah,
just
what
like,
grapevine?
Yeah, the publishing grapevine.
Yeah, what?
Like, that you were working with Gossip Girl, and at this point, it was still very, very hush hush. Nobody knew that Gossip Girl had ghostwriters, so you had to sign crazy amounts of NDAs.
Right.
And, she was like, I really like what you did, what you theoretically did in the book, and we want to give you a series under your own name. Like I didn't even have. It sounds so ridiculous now because everybody talks about, how hard they had to fight to get their, first books and whatever. And it's not to say I didn't work hard. I worked really hard for all of my career, but that really just fell in my lap. I did not have to go chase that at all. So I did my first YA series for Penguin.
Wow.
And so I can't, ghostwriting was great because it really, it opened up these other avenues for me that I wouldn't have been able to access. In terms of how do I ghostwrite and not make it a Jennifer Banash book, generally I work on things that I don't write. Like things
that's really smart.
Yeah, things that don't appeal to me generally as a writer, like, working on, like I did like a big book for Forbes, right? Like all about money. It's just not what I do. Or, working on memoir, right? Like I shouldn't say I don't write memoir because I am actually working on a memoir right now. But at the time I did it, or working on really specific genre fiction. Like, I don't write fantasy in my own life and my own work. So I would do fantasy, I would do thrillers, I would do rom-com sort of fiction for people. And again, I don't really do any of that stuff. So it just felt, very sort of light and breezy. And I could sort of write a few chapters of that and then, work on.
And it's a job. It becomes a job rather than a passion. Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of writers get hung up is a lot of people have asked me where do you get your inspiration from? And how do you sit down every day? And it's like, if I had to sit down every day and wait for some muse to descend from the heavens, I would never write a book.
Yeah,
I know. Never write a book. It's a job.
You gotta be disciplined. Yeah, I had a high school student once ask me something like that, and then he said, "Oh, I guess you do it so you can have the beach house." And I said, "What beach house? What are you talking about?"
But people get so, writers really in particular get so, I don't want to say upset, but disturbed when you say stuff like that, but really I think of writing as I clock in, I do my pages, I clock out. It's not romantic, but if I were romantic about it, I have another book due July 1st. If I were romantic about this and precious about this whole process, I would be blowing right past that deadline.
Oh my God.
Blowing right past it.
Oh my God. Okay, I want to get to the audience questions, which is, let's see. Oh, when did you know that you were a writer? Did you write stories as a kid? How did that come about?
I started out as a poet, actually. I was not a fiction writer at all. And so when I went to the university, not the university, but Arizona State, when I was doing my undergrad, I was studying with poets like Norman Duby and Alberto Rios and the poet I, who I very much love. And I was serious about poetry. And it's probably partially why I write fiction the way that I do and the particular style that I write in, because I didn't come out of it. I loved reading novels. I was a voracious reader, but I did not write short stories. I did not write prose. I didn't write my first novel until I was probably, I want to say under my own name, probably like 24, something like that.
Wow.
And that novel got me an agent, or I was 25. Yeah. That novel got me an agent, but it never got published. Go figure.
Oh, that's so sad. Do you ever look back on it? Do you ever look back on that book and do you think it should have gotten published?
Oh, I look back on that particular book with a lot of fondness. It's really sort of like, it was like my little baby, but it's okay that it's not out there. It's nowhere near. I was still way too indebted to other writers at that point in my career. So
right.
It really kind of like, it feels like a pastiche to me when I look at it now. It doesn't, my voice was not there. The beginnings of it were there. And I think that's why agents responded to it. Like there was a strength there, but it wasn't fully formed me. How could it be? I was like a baby.
Right, you're 25.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I didn't really know I was a writer. This is going to sound like the stupidest thing I've ever said, but I'm going to say it. I didn't really claim my identity as a writer probably until about a year ago. So
wow, what was the moment when you claimed that identity? That's a really interesting thing to say.
Like, what do you do? And I wouldn't say I'm an author. I would say, well, I'm an editor and a ghostwriter, and I've published a bunch of novels, right? And I don't know. I went through such a shift in my identity over the past 3 years that, and just like sort of doing work for other people really fell by the wayside. And then so the only way I could really explain what I did with any, truth to it was to say I'm an author, because that was the only thing I was doing. And it felt right after that. And not to say we all have to make a living, right? We all take jobs, like we all take editing jobs or whatever. And I love working with clients and I love all that. But I had a period of time where I was not doing that. The only thing I was doing was finishing Ava and writing this next book that I'm turning in July, called The Essential Elizabeth Stone. And, when you have books coming back to back like that, you do start to feel like you're owning your career in a way.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah, I know it sounds weird.
Right. It's weird, but I think you're right. I mean, I used to tell people I'm a writer with a question mark until one of my friends said, would you cut that out? Yeah. What is wrong with you? No question mark.
Yeah, that was last year was the first time I ever really embodied that. And I don't even say writer anymore. I say I'm an author, and I think there's a really big distinction.
There's a difference.
Except for me, there's a big distinction between those two things. Saying you're an author implies you have a career that stands alone on its own, not that is dependent on doing the work for other people, right? Writers could do anything. They could do
that's right. They can be writing copy.
Write copy, do whatever. But an author only does one thing. They write their own books. Yeah.
Great. Oh, that's really good. I'm going to start using author instead of writer.
Thank you,
Jennifer. We have another question from the audience, which is, do you have a soundtrack when you write books? And were you listening to particular music while you were writing Ava?
Yes, you can actually go listen to the soundtrack because it's posted on Large Hearted Boy. So I just did a whole post on this. You can listen to it on Large Hearted Boy and download it yourself.
Hey, listen to soundtrack on Large Hearted Boy. Okay. All right. And I have one last question, which is my question, which is, what's the best and what's the worst writing advice that anybody ever gave you?
What's the best and the worst? Is that what you asked? Okay.
Yeah.
I think the worst advice I ever got was that old adage that we all get told, like, write what you know.
Right.
I think that's terrible advice.
I think it's terrible advice too. What fun is
Tell
that?
them to write what they know. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like with me anyway, part of the fun of writing a book is getting to like enter into like some whole new world and really inhabit that and learn about it, and learn about those characters. Like I don't write like the people in my books are not me. I don't write myself as a character over and over and over again. The point of being a writer is that I get to live all these other lives. So yeah, I don't want to write what I know. I want to write what I know and what I feel emotionally.
Right. I was going to say the emotions. Yeah. You could be writing about a race car driver, and that's certainly not you. It's not me.
Yeah.
But that race car driver is going to have emotions that we have. I mean, you can't help it.
Like,
as well as
the book that I'm finishing now takes place like in the culinary world, and like I know about that world somewhat because my ex-husband was a food writer for a really long time, but I personally am like, a terrible cook. I don't live in that world myself. So again, it's a really fun landscape for me to get to explore. So yeah, so I think that was the worst, was write what you know, because that could be.
Oh, what's the best?
Yeah, like the best. I don't know if I've ever gotten good writing advice. I mean, I'm just being honest. I don't know if I've ever gotten good writing advice. The stuff that I tend to remember is the stuff I don't want to remember, really.
Right.
That's I think the best advice that I've ever gotten was probably from my friend Gina Frangello, who, if you haven't read her books, please go check her out. She's amazing.
Oh, yes. I'm going to put that in the comments, too.
Yeah, she's incredible. But, writing Ava was really one of the hardest things that I've really ever had to do. Writing a book when things are just normal is hard enough. Writing a book in the middle of a global pandemic, where you're just like sort of struggling with existence, is something else entirely. And I remember I was in like I went through like kind of a very severe depression when I was writing that book. And I remember Gina texting me one day, and I said to her, I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can do this book anymore. And she said to me, just go sit at your desk for me and just write 3 pages. That's all you have to do today. Just write 3 pages. And, it worked. And now when I'm blocked, that's the voice I hear in my head, is just go to your desk and write 3 pages. If you can't write 3 pages.
Great advice. Go to your desk and write.
Go to your desk, write 3 pages.
Great advice. Okay. All right. Well, I want to tell everybody, thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to go and buy Jennifer's book, The Rise and Fall of Ava. Whoops, I lost my sheet. Buy Jennifer's book wherever you can. Buy all of her books. She's going to have a new book coming up too, which is amazing.
Summer 24.
And thank you so much for being here, Jennifer. And we'll see all of you next time. And Jennifer, just hang on. Okay, hold on.